Sometimes the game you want to play doesn't involve exploring the lands, fighting monsters, or thwarting an evil plot. Sometimes the game you want to play is a cheesy romance set in a tiny, cozy village. This week on Schedule for Launch, join me, Zach Walsh, as I talk with Will, sometimes called Kenan, about his game, Warmer in the Winter. We discuss Hallmark films, Kickstarter, and how to play an adorable game. Welcome to Schedule for Launch, a podcast to discover the projects that you may have missed. This week, I am super happy to be back once again with Will. We actually lost the audio from the first time we did this, so Will, thanks for joining me again.
You're welcome. I've not to toot a different horn too much, but I've done 400 some odd episodes of another show, so I know that feeling.
Yeah. So, audience, we actually recorded a couple days ago, and it was bad. It was a bad time for technical difficulties. So hopefully this one works out a lot better, and it's already sounding a little clearer. So, Will, once again for me, but first time for the audience, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and who you are?
Yeah, happily. So I'm Will Lentz. Sometimes folks might have seen me online as Kenan or Gameonomicon.
Mm-hmm.
And I have been attached to gaming in some form for about 20 years now. But the majority of that was through competitive card gaming. Of course, you know, as a kid, I dabbled in Magic and whatnot, but in college, I picked up the Game of Thrones card game and just absolutely fell in love with that system. So that's been my primary focus since it launched in 2002. And, you know, I've traveled to the World Championship for that and U.S. Nationals and hosted that here and, you know, all sorts of things like that. Podcasted about it and that type of thing. And I think, as is kind of natural for a lot of competitive card gamers, especially, you know, when we're reviewing releases and talking about interactions or reacting when, you know, say a new band list or something comes out, there's always that feeling that, oh man, I would have done this differently or better or, you know, whatever. And that kind of started that design itch. So I have written some for Fantasy Flight Games, who made Game of Thrones, for some product inserts and articles on their website and that type of thing that eventually led to a kind of online gaming magazine site for a bit, Card Game DB, things like that. And some of my local players here also were doing RPGs, so I got into that. Some of them were involved in 7th Seas 2nd edition, so I wound up doing some writing for that, and that kind of hooked me that, oh, hey, wait a minute, maybe I could really actually release some of my own stuff, and then I got started there.
Yeah, you've done a couple things, but today we're actually here to talk about what's really a heartwarming little game called Warmer in the Winter. Can you tell us a little bit about the premise of that?
Yeah, I mean, the short premise that I give people is just cheesy Hallmark movies. You know, the stereotypical kind that people think of as soon as you say Hallmark movies.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are tons of others that are making those Lifetime, and I think there's a new channel in GAC, and of course Netflix is, and I mean, everybody is tapping into that market these days. But those cheesy, recycled Christmas romances where, you know, the big shot, big city lawyer has to go back to her hometown and, reconnect with her love of the wilderness and, the family reindeer farm or whatever it might be. And, find love.
I know that movie.
Yeah.
I've seen that one.
Yeah. I mean, any example I dream up to mention at this point, I'm pretty sure you would say, "Oh, I've seen that movie." They hit the same plot beats all the time, but that I kind of like that because even if you have not personally watched them, they're just kind of part of the cultural consciousness or zeitgeist. Like, people are familiar with the concept, and that makes it really easy for them to kind of hook into, oh, okay, hey, I know how this type of story is supposed to work.
Yeah, that's what I think the strength of this game really comes down to, is that familiarity. Because I don't watch a lot of Hallmark films. And I did look it up this time to make sure that I could figure it out. The movie that I see every year that I can't stand, but I also know I'm sitting down and watching whenever it comes on, is The Tree That Saved Christmas, which is a Hallmark film about a woman returning to her home in Vermont and her family trying not to sell the family Christmas tree farm.
I almost used that exact plot for my example a moment ago.
And there's like nothing wrong with that, but you're right. It's a recycled plot. Usually it's a woman from the big city coming back, and then the holiday hunk shows up to give her a reason to love the season. And Warmer in the Winter kind of brings that to the forefront in a really fun way.
We are mentioning the stereotypical story, right? And I am aware that these type of films kind of catch some flack in some circles for, let's say, a lack of diversity in cast and concept.
Yeah, 100%.
I like that, by bringing this to a tabletop game, that opens it up to anybody to tell that type of story, and insert themselves into it and see themselves in it, even if they won't always see that on screen right now. And I do admit, and this is brought up in the book, there are some terms we use in the book that, for instance, may specifically gender somebody. The dashing mentions being a prince, for instance. And that's not intended to shoehorn anybody into anything or exclude anybody else. And we mentioned it in the book that, like, we mention them because it's part of the trope, and it kind of helps build that flavor, but everybody is highly encouraged to kind of take charge and take ownership of this in their own way and not feel excluded on any of those fronts.
Yeah. Warmer in the Winter really hits on the fact that it's both a loving nod and poking fun at that style of film. It's really interesting. So what kind of inspired you to do this, though? Because it's not something that most people would really conceive of. So how'd you get pen to paper on this game? I almost said movie.
I'm honestly, that's how I think of everything, because it's really mostly planned for one shots anyway, and kind of that movie structure gives people a skeleton of a one shot, basically, anyway. And and we refer to the playbooks in this game as roles and things like that kind of lean into that aspect. It is funny that you mentioned pen to paper in this example, because I'm not sure if I can quite put my finger on the exact impetus, but I know a couple years ago, my wife is a huge fan of these movies. This year, or rather, now that we're in 22, last year, we probably watched at least 20 of these things in the Christmas season. And she's a gamer as well. She played Game of Thrones with me. She was in our RPG group for a while and things like that. And I admit that that group did not always gel quite as well, or she did not gel with it as well. Group of guys that have been, friends through college and stuff, and just kind of like wanted to tell a different kind of story than she was super into, and things like that. And, while we did try to improve on that in our group, at some point as I was researching and getting into other games beyond more traditional stuff, D&D, even like we play Hunter and like Song of Ice and Fire and things, I'd hit on Powered by the Apocalypse stuff and Monster Hearts, and something in the middle of whatever movie we were watching, something just clicked that, wait a minute, like there are these other types of stories that can be told in games, and like there's kind of a market, an untapped market, so to speak. Maybe not market is the word I want, but like subset of people that like want to tell these different types of stories that they connect with, rather than, the typical D&D power fantasy. And so like I grabbed literal pen and paper and started scribbling notes while the movie was going on. And there's kind of a funny picture, I think up on our Instagram, that my wife snapped of me in Christmas sweater on the couch with the fireplace behind me and pen and paper in hand while I start frantically scribbling it down.
That's incredible. So it all kind of started from wanting to tell some different stories about something that you and your wife share. I think that's very sweet.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people can dig these movies. It's not something, specifically for the wives in the group or whatever, as that may kind of sound the way I'm telling that story, because I also personally love these movies. Maybe not to the level that my wife does, but there's tons of fun to be had for people of all stripes.
Mm-hmm. They're super corny and cheesy, and I absolutely adore watching one or two a year.
Yeah, leaning into that corny and cheesiness is so much fun.
One of the things you mentioned there was roles, and that's obviously a huge part of any Powered by the Apocalypse game, is the role that a character takes or their playbook. Can you talk a little bit about roles and what exactly they do in Warmer in the Winter?
Yeah, happily. So I mentioned that we use some terms here to kind of lean into some of the archetypes and tropes of this genre. So one of those is the GM or narrator or whatever you might be used to calling it. Here we call them a matchmaker that kind of helps, even from the ground level, to set the expectation of what your goal is, what your piece of the story is here. And we carry that through as well to the playbooks, where here we call them roles, and you are playing this particular role in the film or the story or the play, however you'd like to dramatize that particular experience. But the roles are a wide range of kind of stereotypical characters that you would see in these. And a lot of these types of characters, as we've said, are kind of recycled from one film to another, or we even branched out some. Also, my wife is a huge fan of Gilmore Girls, and as I was kind of talking this idea with her, we realized that there's a lot of overlap in the types of characters that appear in these Hallmark movies, as well as kind of the dramedy stuff like Gilmore Girls or the Good Witch. So there is kind of a central figure in these films that we do represent here, called the Beloved, who can be a focal point. And they do, for instance, gain a heartstring on all other characters at the start of the game to help kind of set things in motion. but it's not a requirement by any means to play with the beloved, the main character, so to speak. I might recommend it for folks on their first playthrough, but there's a lot of other stuff here that you can delve into, and especially with the types of characters that might get shuffled to the sidelines fairly often in these types of films, like, say, the Elder, who's usually just, some sage advice giver, maybe 2 scenes in the movie or something. But if you want to play through, someone in their golden years, finding love then, like, go for it. There's so many roles to choose from here. I'm sure not gonna detail all of them. I think there's 14 right now in the book, which is more than even was initially planned. But turns out we did really well on stretch goals for a couple extra ideas. At both of the let's say premium backer levels that offered an opportunity to create a role. Both of those got purchased and folks participated in dreaming up a new role. In fact, the guest stretch goal author, he wound up with 2 ideas. So Damon Stone, a friend of mine, actually offered to create a second one that he was not initially on tap for because he was so excited about it. That one is The Enthusiast, if you are curious to go look. And you will see both my name and Kristen, my wife's name, though it's spelled differently here, because actually Damon's wife is also named Kristen and spelled this way. So there's a lot of like nice little nods here, but there's so much to do in different ways they interact with each other and cause. For instance, the dashing is one of my personal favorites, where they are kind of called away to a duty of some kind. And I mentioned earlier that might be, say, as a prince who has a duty to their nation, or it may be something like a doctor, and they just, they're constantly called into the hospital to save someone's lives, and the way that their duty mechanically kind of pulls them toward it and away from other players is something I really enjoy.
My personal favorite that you told me about was the Out of Time. I think it's a phenomenal idea. It's incredible.
Yeah. Oh, the Out of Time. That is probably my hands down favorite in the whole thing. It was largely inspired by a movie we watched on Netflix. Have you seen The Night Before Christmas? And that is the Knigget Before Christmas.
I haven't watched it myself, but I know the plot.
Okay, yeah. This Middle Ages knight is brought through time by this crone who maybe is Mrs. Claus. It's later revealed. Sorry for the spoilers.
Oh,
and comes to the modern day because he'll never become a knight or a true knight unless he finds true love or something along those lines. And him trying to fit into the modern world and his kind of older sense of propriety and all. I had a blast with that, and I even realized, even in other types of media, that like that type of thing pops up a lot. Like I love Captain America, for instance. Good old classic Steve Rogers, who's basically that same type of character. So I say, dive in and I don't know, try to understand that reference.
Yeah.
Double layered joke there with Steve saying I understood that reference.
Yeah. So also too, one of the things that came up is actually a group role, and you mentioned that crone in Night Before Christmas, and that kind of leads into the shared role of the supernatural. What is the supernatural, and how does a group of people utilize this for their game.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite pieces of this. It is partly inspired by that, even by I mentioned the TV show The Good Witch, where one of the main characters is this good witch who keeps kind of using little nods that may or may not be magic to kind of push people different directions over the course of the show. So that was adapted here as the supernatural character, which is optional. People can choose whether they would like to use it or not, but it does fit the tone of a lot of games to craft this character that maybe is, actually secretly Santa Claus or Mrs. Claus, or is an angel that's been sent back, or a secret fairy or something. In fact, actually, someone told me about one of their playthroughs where the ghost of the beloved's deceased husband possessed a snowman and came back to teach her, how to love again and find somebody new and
Oh,
yeah, I loved
that's
that
super
concept.
sweet.
Yeah. This new kind of take on Frosty the Snowman. So everybody together will decide what type of character this is, what sort of method that their nudges are themed as, whether it's comical mishaps, somebody tripping and falling off the ladder into someone else's arms, or things like they're baking magical cookies that improve people's mood, or the door mysteriously opens and blows an important paper off the desk. Things along those lines, however you want to theme it. And then folks have one of the meta currencies in the game is a providence point, which is can be used to bring that supernatural character into a scene and trigger some of their moves to nudge other people and other characters. And I like that because it's kind of this communal effort. It gives everybody this this way to interact in a positive way at any moment with other characters and other scenes that their character maybe is not normally in. And even in most PBTA games there is kind of this character conflict that's built into a lot of the way the playbooks function, and there's definitely some of that here, but the supernatural character always kind of gives this out to do something positive for the group and the story as a whole, no matter what your actual role is.
Yeah, it's sort of like a built-in plot driver that players and the matchmaker can utilize to kind of get things going when they start to get stagnant.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it definitely is, and I like that you pointed out players and matchmakers, so it gives a little bit extra control to move that story along to the players if needed.
Mm-hmm. So we've been talking a lot about specifically Hallmark Christmas films, but can you tell people a little bit about the setting for Warmer in the Winter? Because there is a built-in kind of concept, or at least framework, for players and matchmakers to utilize during their game.
Yeah, I think framework is a good word for it. We've provided two separate kind of sample settings. One is the stereotypical small town of Hopewood Springs and, their little inn and cafe and city hall and that type of thing. While another is your stereotypical Empire City with their skyscrapers and coffee shops and museums and parks and such. And one thing that I really wanted, especially for a one-shot game, is for it to be really easy for folks to just pick up and run with. And one of the things when I first started getting into looking at PBTA stuff was, at least the ones that I happened to look at initially, Didn't seem to do a whole lot with setting. For instance, Monster Hearts was the first one that I really kind of got into. And there's so much great interpersonal conflict, and the way the playbooks and the characters really integrate with the mechanics, and how they are encouraged to play with each other, so to speak, or manipulate each other, maybe is a better word. But there's very little about where it is and what's going on, which is great for some people in some games to dream everything up. But as I delved in more, I hit on Girl Underground, which I thought did a much better job of integrating kind of location and setting and making it kind of matter. Mechanically is the word I was about to use, but it's not like there are different dice rolls there, but it is at least integrated with hooks to pull people in and offer different driving points for the story if needed. So I definitely kind of use that as a launching point for both Hopewood Springs and Empire City, and wanted people to have a starting point for where to put a one-shot, and kind of ready-made characters that are there, different like hints of stories or problems that are going on that can be dropped in at a moment's notice, that hopefully intrigue players enough to follow up more and can spin out further from there.
I think that makes perfect sense too. I've noticed it too. I really like Powered by the Apocalypse games. They're some of my favorite, but there's usually some stuff left out for setting. And that's because that's how those styles of games work. Like building settings as you need them is kind of how it's done for a lot of them. Mm-hmm. But the ones that I have seen that kind of have a little bit more of a rigid setting don't go into detail enough, or as much as I would like. So seeing how Warmer in the Winter is set up, Empire City and
Hopewood Springs.
Hopewood Springs. Thank you so much. Seeing how they're set up, it definitely gives players and whoever's running this game a much easier time of not limitations, but concepts that can be utilized in their games.
Yeah. Especially for one shots. They can grab this and run with it really quick, pick it up and go.
Mm-hmm. And during this time, you've mentioned Monster Hearts a couple times. And I know that's one of the big inspirations for this game was Monster Hearts and Simple Worlds by Avery Alder. And I think also you had mentioned Kids on Bikes by Jonathan Gilmour and Doug, I always butcher his name, Lewandowski.
Lewandowski, yeah.
Yes. How did these games influence the creation of Warmer in the Winter?
So Monster Hearts, like I said, was the first I was exposed to Powered by the Apocalypse. So there's always going to be kind of this warm spot in my own heart for it. And B, everything I wind up thinking about to some extent is kind of filtered through that as my first experience there.
Yeah.
And while I do love Monster Hearts, everything there at least is, I would say, kind of is encouraged to take that darker edge. Players or characters rather.
More like CW stuff.
Yeah. CW, people purposely don't tell each other different things or try to do something to specifically manipulate somebody else. And of course there's the concept of sex, which you're not generally going to find touched on in a Hallmark movie. But everything does take a bit more combative of an edge, maybe is the word I want. There's more conflict really built into that. And I got to thinking that something doesn't necessarily have to follow that same lens that you're looking at these interactions through.
Yeah.
Even though there is honestly a lot of overlap in the, ways that people interact with different relationships or are looking for a relationship or whatever. This is just the rose-colored glasses take on those interpersonal relations, I would say, versus Monster Hearts is the edgy goth take, on that kind of thing. The Buffy take on it. However I should phrase that.
It's a very wholesome game compared to Monster Hearts, which can have a little bit of dirt depending on who you're playing it with.
Yeah. So when I was trying to delve into this and figure out, where to go with it, Simple World, like you mentioned, wound up being a huge resource. I actually reached out to Avery Alder on Twitter and was basically like, "Hey, I'm working on my first PBTA game. I really love Simple World as just kind of like a baseline skeleton. Can I use some of that?" And quite thankfully and somewhat mystifyingly to me, because I was literally nobody just randomly reaching out, was told, "Hey, sure, go ahead, do whatever you want, use whatever you want." So that was a huge boost to have as a starting place.
Yeah.
Things have been tweaked and expanded and kind of rephrased from there, but I definitely still have to give a huge shout out and thank you for Simple World. Kids on Bikes actually played into the supernatural character.
Okay.
And yeah, because I hadn't seen anything at the time in the Powered by the Apocalypse space that had kind of a communal character.
Okay.
Yeah. And I wanted to include something supernatural like a Santa Claus or whatever, but I worried that having one player directly say be an elf or something would feel lopsided, even if it's not necessarily mechanically lopsided. That story-wise it would be. So I wanted to include them, but let everybody access that somehow. And Kids on Bikes showed me a way with their without having it in front of me now, I forget how they term it, but basically they're equivalent to 11 from Stranger Things, and how everybody at the table can kind of have access to that character and their powers and work with that as needed. And I thought, aha, that's it. That's how you bring your angel or your ghost or whatever into Warmer in the Winter. You don't make just one person be that. You let everybody be that. And so, yeah, that's how that came about.
That's amazing. It's such a good concept too, especially in a setting like this. So let's take a step back from Warmer in the Winter. Let's go a little bit more into yourself. Right at the beginning, you mentioned your name's Will, but a lot of people have seen the name Kenan before. I thought this was a very good story, and I'd love to hear it again. Can you tell people why there's that, why you also go by Kenan?
Yeah. Well, I honestly, dear listeners, I think this story was probably presented in an even funnier manner in the Lost episode.
Yeah.
So I'm going to tell this in reverse from how it was told last time, which is Kenan, which is Kennon, is a name I've been going by online. Email addresses, MSN Messenger, forum posts, all sorts of stuff, Instagram, that type of thing, since freshman year of high school. So it's been a little while for me at this point. And I thought at the time, that's right when the internet was hitting its stride for me. Rural Missouri kid finally got dial-up internet to the house and all that. And, I mentioned Innocent Messenger. That
Yeah,
dates
that's fair.
everything
That's fair.
for a lot of folks right there. And at the time, I was taking German courses in school and just starting out. And I thought, oh, this is going to be great. I'm getting online. I'm going to get to know all these people. It's going to be fantastic. So I there's a German verb, kennen, which is actually Kennen, which means to know people and places, like to be acquainted with them.
Yeah.
And I thought I was being awesome and witty and went and used it. And then, 6 months later or something, realized, oh no, freshman Will is an idiot and misspelled it. But I stuck with it ever since.
I think it's so funny. It's very like I've definitely done things like that. That's also very relatable. But it's just a fun little story to have attached to the work and what you've done here. It's so good.
Thank you. I've noticed now I seem to have a habit of these naming ideas that I think are really awesome and really witty at the time, and then it's months down the line before I realize that, oh, that's not as good as I thought, or there's a problem here. So I've even run into something similar with the company that I started to publish these games, and all of our internet handles, or my internet handle in various places for this, which is Gameonomicon, which at the time was this great idea I thought I had.
Yeah.
Adding game and Omicon or Nomicon, like a book, like the Necronomicon or whatever. So it's like a book of games, right? And you can kind of see that idea in our logo. But it's actually kind of hard to spell that off the top of your head for people. And I've noticed it's not always easiest for other people to pronounce if they haven't heard it before. So I apologize, everybody. I feel like I'm committed at this point, but that is GAME, so game, and then NOM, nom, ICON, icon, Gameonomicon. So there you go.
The first time we did this, I asked Will where we could find more out about his games, and everything just went to a dead stop as he tried to type it out and make sure he was saying it right.
Yeah, I'm bad with that. I just in general spelling stuff, unless I can see it, I generally lose my place in where I am in the word. So I type out a lot of stuff before I tell people how something is spelled.
I'm the exact same way. I do that a lot. This game was kickstarted, and you had mentioned backing goals and that stuff. Warmer in the Winter got over 3 times the original goal for a zine. Can you tell me a little bit about that and that entire experience there with Kickstarter and being a pretty successful run there?
Yeah. I was very, very pleasantly surprised, a little overwhelmed, maybe. I guess first I want to start with a gigantic props to anybody listening to this who was a backer. Thank you so much for that. But this was my first ever Kickstarter. I had heard about Zine Quest 2 very late in the game, and heard about it not so much from the idea of creating something, but just looking for projects to back and cool games that I wanted to get my grubby little mitts on. So I backed probably half a dozen projects then. And then when Zine Quest 3 rolled around, I was starting to get more active online in kind of the indie RPG space, and thought, well, what the heck? This is kind of the smallest project that I could try, and there's a lot of other people trying to do this right now. Low dollar amounts, short length of time for the campaign, like there's no better time to try and do it than now, I guess. And so I jumped on it with a low goal of 1,000, and like you said, did 300% of that, which was phenomenal. Yeah, it was really good. That some word got spread, I think, by venues that are not often gaming venues. There are some romance podcasts that I worked out some advertising with, some paid, some not. Ones that did reviews of like romance novels. I've got some friends that are very active in, and I apologize now that I don't have the name in front of me to remember, but they're very active in the like fan Facebook group for this podcast, and knew that there was a sizable portion of gamers in there as well. Things like that. So like sometimes it's really neat, I think, to branch out of the standard tabletop gaming space and see what can catch people's eye. So that was a very, very good feeling.
Yeah, I think one of the big advantages of this is that there's not a whole lot like it. And if there is, I've never seen anything quite like it. I've seen romance stuff, but this takes a very familiar concept and gives it, like I said earlier, a loose skeleton for people to follow along. And it's not a long-term campaign. This game works out best as short bouts, one-shots, up to 3 games if you're incredibly daring with a story. So it really works for what it's advertised as, what it promises, and it gives you all the tools you need to succeed at telling a good story that way.
Well, thank you. I'm always glad to hear that kind of thing. I mean, when you're getting started in this kind of space, right? Any feedback is always great to hear, especially if it's positive, but any at all, because it can be hard to get the word out there. There's so many folks trying to do this right now that it's easy for any one project to be lost in that sea of stuff. So honestly, I want to thank you for doing this show to highlight a bunch of these projects and people. That is the type of thing that's really needed.
Well, thank you so much, Will. It's been a lot of fun. I've learned a lot during this. I played a lot of really cool games because of it too. But we're here to talk about you right now. And we're actually going to be wrapping up really soon because we've been going for about 45 minutes now. So I got 2 more questions for you.
Yeah.
These are the same 2 that I ask on every episode. And the first one being, what advice can you give someone who wants to start something of their own, but they don't really have any background and they don't know where to start themselves?
I think that one's kind of a 2-piece answer. The first piece is probably just do it. I know it sounds trite to steal the old Nike slogan, which I don't think they've used in 20 years, but just do it. I know it's not going to be perfect. I know you're going to feel like an imposter, but unless you actually put pen to paper or hit publish on that post or whatever it is, there's no progress being made. So you've got to do something to do anything. So as trite as that is, I'll move on to a more useful second part, which is that I would really recommend a lot of folks trying to get started in the tabletop space right now to just head over to itch.io, the website, and just search up the term SRD. That stands for System Resource Document. And that is... it's stolen from computer technical terminology, but basically it's going to be an open licensed set of rules, usually just Creative Commons by attribution stuff, for a ton of different games, where those designers say, here is the bare bones skeleton of how this game and the system is supposed to work, And a lot of times they will also spell out some extra advice on, here's why this works, here's a different way to play with it, and that type of thing, and walk you through being able to use that to get your own game up and running ASAP. Yeah. And I sort of hate to toot my own horn here, but also I honestly do think this would be really useful for people. I've got an SRD up there for a system that I call the Second Guess system. And it is for solo role-playing game, like journaling games. And it's a single page. And the goal is for the finished games to be a single page. So the SRD is there, so all the broad strokes of how it works are up there. I've got several free examples on the Gameonomicon itch page. And the barrier for entry, I think, is as low as it could possibly be. You've already got the skeleton. You only have to flesh out a page's worth of stuff. To play test it, you only need yourself. You don't have to get together a group of 3 to 5 other friends. It's as low as you can get, and then you can throw it up on itch. You can hit publish, and you've got something. You did the thing.
Yeah, you said the just do it thing is trite, but we keep on hearing that over and over again on the podcast. I think it's super important. I also really agree with utilizing an SRD for the first one. I am trying to get better at writing myself. Doing this has inspired me to try and work on some games. I've looked at quite a few different SRDs. Super useful, really, really easy to use for the most part, because most of the really hard work is already done for you. So highly agreed with Will's advice on this one. Will, where can people find out more about you and Gameonomicon and Warmer in the Winter? Where can people find your stuff and pick that up for themselves?
Yeah, so we do have a website at Gameonomicon.com. For actual purchases, you will, of course, head over to one of the other big game stores rather than directly on the site, either to DriveThruRPG or Itch. We've got a page on both with all my games up there. You can also, if you just want to follow along, probably my most active social media for Gameonomicon is on Twitter. There it is at _Gameonomicon. But also there's a Facebook page and an Instagram page and that type of thing. So give it a follow and keep up to date. I've got a couple big new projects cooking, but I don't want to delve into that just yet.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later. So, audience, as always, Will's stuff, that's going to be linked in the description down below. Go check out Warmer in the Winter. It's adorable. I've seen some incredible reviews for it. The game is just... I really like this game. This is something so different and so much fun, and I can't recommend it enough. Will, thank you so much for coming back on and doing this so short notice. Like I said, it's only been 2 days since we last spoke, but I'm grateful that we could retry this and have what I think is actually a much better episode.
I agree. I think that this flowed really well, and thank you for having me back on and wanting to give it another shot.
Absolutely. I look forward to talking to you again in the future. Audience, thank you so much for listening. Will and Warm in the Winter, they've already launched, so go pick it up. Take care of yourselves. Have a good night. See you on the next one. Bye. Once again, thank you so much to Will for joining me on the podcast this week. I had some really bad technical difficulties with the original recording of this, and it just sounded awful. It was really choppy and just bad. So Will, being the amazing person he is, offered to do it again right away. So thank you so much, Will. We couldn't have done this one without you for many reasons. Please go support Will and Gameonomicon. Pick up Warm in the Winter. I promise you this game is a fun change of pace, and who knows what kind of wonderfully hilarious and cheesy stories you and your friends will come up with. As always, thank you so much, listener. We are only a couple weeks away from the 1-year anniversary of the show, and it's been incredible to have you all around. So thank you so much for showing your continued support. As of this episode, I think we're just shy of hitting 800 listeners, so I'm absolutely floored. I can't say it any other way. I know I haven't said it in a while, but if you could please like and rate the show on Spotify and iTunes, that would help a lot. The review system helps get the show noticed, which in turn helps bring in more amazing creators and get those creators supported. So if you can go do that, I'd really appreciate it. If you like this episode and you want to hear more, check out the backlog and share what you like with a friend, or maybe join the Discord. Word of mouth is the best way to continue growing this show, and it would absolutely mean the world to me if I could speak with you at some point, even about how your day is going. So let me know. Drop into the Discord. Talk to us. I'm still trying to find someone for next week's episode. A lot of people are waiting for February to come up because of Zine Month and Zine Quest. So they've been a little bit trickier to track down and get some advertisements for. I can't promise an episode next week. But until that happens, I just want you to know to take care of yourselves. Have a good night, and I'll see you really soon. Bye.